I'm Ted Seides, and this is Capital Allocators. This show is an open exploration of the people and process behind capital allocation. Through conversations with leaders in the money game, we learn how these holders of the keys to the kingdom allocate their time and their capital. You can join our mailing list and access premium content at capitalallocators.com.
All opinions expressed by Ted and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Capital Allocators or their firms. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Clients of Capital Allocators or podcast guests may maintain positions in securities discussed on this podcast.
My guest on today's show is Jennifer Prosek, the founder and CEO of Prosek Partners, a leading marketing and communications firm that for 30 years has helped the world's top brands navigate what comes next. In asset management, Prosek Partners clients oversee $60 trillion and comprise a who's who in private and public markets. Jen is a popular past guest on the show from her first appearance 5 years ago, and second when she shared her thoughts on navigating the pandemic. Our conversation updates Jen's thoughts on the emerging market of branding in the private markets, the importance of nailing the narrative, power of convening, maximizing value at conferences, and identifying talent. We discuss her thoughts on the trends driving capital flows and some great Jen Isms from her LinkedIn newsletter called Leading in Volatile Times. Before we get going, I'm excited to share that I have a new book coming out on September 10th. It's called Private Equity Deals. The book is a series of case studies from the podcast that discusses private equity transactions, including overviews on the industry from some of the largest LPs and deals directly from GPs. As far as I know, it may be the first book of its type that dives into private equity as it actually occurs without the typical hyperbole you read in the headlines. I happen to think it's the best of my 3 books, and I'm grateful to a who's who of private equity professionals who have heaped praise inside the book's cover. Pre-orders are now available. For the next week, Barnes & Noble is offering 25% off if you use the code PREORDER25, and Amazon Prime Day is right around the corner. And by the way, I've never understood why books get promoted and pre-sold 2 months before you can get your hands on them. But let's just say, after writing 3 books, I've seen quite a few quirks in publishing that don't make a lot of sense. So hop on Amazon or Barnes & Noble's website and grab your copy of Private Equity Deals today, or wait 2 months until you can read it and do it then. But you won't get the 25% off on Barnes & Noble or discount from Amazon Prime. That's the only reason I'm telling you about it now. So thanks so much for spreading the word about my new book in 2 months called Private Equity Deals. Please enjoy my conversation with Jennifer Prosek. Jen, so great to be with you.
Thanks for having me.
So when you last came on, you had mentioned a number of years ago this concept of an emerging market for branding of asset management firms. And I thought it'd be fun to start with your take of what's transpired over the last couple of years.
Sure. So the emerging market of marketing is the private market space. And the reason I call it that is because these are firms that had never spent money on brand or proactive reputation management. It was all the defense work. And we saw that market conditions would change and firms would one day wake up and care about these things. And that happened. And I would say when we last spoke, it was happening. And now there is not one private markets firm on the planet that doesn't believe that brand and story and being on the offense doesn't hit the bottom line. It creates efficiencies across this rubric we call talent, deals, and capital. You can attract the best talent in a more efficient way. You can source the best deals in the most efficient way. And you can raise money in a more efficient way if people understand your distinct story.
When you're working with them from not having told their story to trying to get great at it, what are the different levers across? You think about like things they could write, ways they can be speaking in public.
The first thing we have to do for any firm is what we call nailing the narrative. what is the narrative? What is the story? How is it distinct? How can we tell that story in a unique way in a sea of what seems to be sameness? So once we nail the narrative, it's really about what channels do we use. And the reality is thought leadership is the name of the game. So that's speaking, writing, publishing content on a number of different channels. That's getting to know the media that cover the space and getting quoted and producing stories and that bag of tricks.
So I'd love to dive into how you do that. So let's start with, how do you talk to a firm about nailing their narrative?
Well, the nice thing about being so focused on this space is we've heard it all. So when someone says we're really unique because, we know if that's true or not true. So I would think if you were a large consumer packaged goods company, you would do a lot of market research to see, what does the world think of me? Most of my clients don't want to spend the money for the market research. The lucky thing is we are market research because we've been doing this for 20 years. So we probe a number of people, leadership in the company, to hear with our ears, what is the story and what is unique? And there have been many times when we've had to tell a client, this is not unique, but this is. Say it this way. It's also the packaging of the story. I could say, for instance, I have a very unique culture that has a lot of hustle and this and that. Or I could say, we're an army of entrepreneurs. Boom. The packaging makes a lot of difference. Army of entrepreneurs makes someone say, wow, what's an army of entrepreneurs and how is that? And by the way, I wrote a whole book about army of entrepreneurs, as you know. So once you have this unique story, you could take it up and down. You can use it, of course, to talk to an LP or a prospective employee. You could also publish a book on it. I mean, again, you know, we worked with Bridgewater for years. Radical truth and transparency was the handle of their culture. And it was fascinating. And it became a best-selling book. So there are all kinds of channels to use, small, medium, and large, in telling your story.
I'd love to hear an example in your head. Bridgewater's one in the private markets. And you think there's mega cap, there's mid-market, maybe something that's come up relatively recently where you saw what that story was that even the manager hadn't done their own.
Well, the one that comes to mind, Partners Group came to us many moons ago. They wanted to build their brand in the United States. And we went through this discovery process, this nail the narrative process. And I remember speaking to their North American CEO about their culture and their approach, and we weren't really getting anything. And then he said, private equity world is very transactional, and I don't believe in that. I'm trying to build a different kind of culture. And we've gone so far as to ban the word deal in our culture. Now, a private equity firm that bans the word deal, that's just symbolic of something else that's going on. So we dug into that approach, that culture, how he was going about it, and it was really interesting. And I remember saying to him, if you use that as the handle, that will allow you to tell the rest of the story. And in that case, media relations was on the table. So we called a reporter at the Wall Street Journal and told them the story of their culture. And within weeks, they had a feature story on the front cover of the business section. And the headline was, "The firm that banned the word deal." So I remember just feeling like we had to dig out that one little thing. But that one little thing was symbolic enough to the reporter that something interesting was going on there culturally. And that, of course, that culture had to lead to great returns. We really want to talk to prospective talent, deals, and capital about not just our culture, but how it leads to the best returns. And it did in that story. So that's the one that comes to mind.
As you go from a firm that's generally been insular, talking to their LPs, but not the outside world, and then wants to tell their story more broadly, there's written pieces, but there's also spoken pieces at conferences and television. How do you go about training someone in public speaking to get them to the point where they're good at telling their own story?
It's a great question. Speaking engagements are one of the most effective way to show the market what you're about and what unique insights you have that are of value. It's become extremely crowded to land a panel or speaking opportunity at these investment conferences. that emerging market of marketing has moved so quickly that most founders now want to be on stage telling their story, again, because they understand the bottom line impact. But how to get someone from zero to hero, everything in life, Malcolm Gladwell said, what is it, the 10,000 hour rule? It is practice, it is reps. So what we try to do is create a safe space where a founder or CEO, CIO can have those reps before going on stage. So for instance, in our world, we have a number of former TV anchors like Deirdre Bolton, who all they do is work with founders, CEOs, CIOs, PMs on getting those reps before they go on stage. And the reps are not just sit straight and speak this way, it's the content. And you've been to many panels at many investment conferences where the content's not that good. So to us, we believe it's a reputational backfire to get on stage and not be interesting, not be memorable. If you're memorable in the other way, he really had nothing to say. That's just not worth doing. So we're pretty hardcore with our clients to make sure they are ready to perform.
How have you thought about other media outlets of helping your clients get their story out?
I experiment with everything myself before I tell a client to do it. One thing that has happened since the pandemic, for instance, is that LinkedIn went from being perceived as a job seekers space to a real thought leadership news breaking platform to serious business people, partially because the pandemic forced us all to find different behaviors to do business. The LPs, the GPs, everyone got on LinkedIn because they were sitting behind their screen trying to close a deal or raise money. And they're like, how do I do this? Let's get on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn has become extremely powerful. And there are different ways to use LinkedIn. Most people use LinkedIn just to show the momentum of their firm. This thing happened today. This deal happened. We hired this person, and that's great. But the next level is really writing longer form content in a newsletter fashion. So for instance, I have a newsletter called Leadership in Volatile Times, and people have to opt into your newsletter. They want to read your stuff just like they would read the Wall Street Journal. And that has been an extremely powerful bottom line value for me and my business. So many of our founders are now writing newsletters and using it across this talent, deals, and capital rubric. If you look at LinkedIn, check out Mark Lipschultz, check out Orlando Bravo. They are very active and sophisticated on LinkedIn because they know it's helping the bottom line.
Once you start putting that message out, you nailed the narrative, you're speaking, then you get into building relationships. I know you spent a lot of time building a network and you see all these people that come in from it, somebody like Deirdre that you wouldn't think would normally be at a communications firm. How do you think about building a network?
I became an entrepreneur by accident in my 20s. I was a person who had no network and I had to build it from scratch. So when you're a startup entrepreneur in your 20s, you don't have the luxury of, I used to work at Goldman Sachs and here's my amazing network. So I got clever about how to build networks. And what I realized was one great relationship can change the course of your career, the course of a business. So network value became an obsession for me. And what I realized is that convening is extremely powerful. So I spend a lot of time convening people who want to get to know each other in small, intimate settings where real relationships can happen. And it's been the most extraordinary part of my career. If you ask me, like, what would you do for free? Convening, because I see the magic of it for my own business, but for everyone in the room. So how do you go about doing that? There's many ways to build a network, but I think anything in life is about the law of reciprocity, giving to receive. So what is giving? Giving the gift of a network is an extraordinary thing to give. So I spend a lot of time giving the gift of network. And I find like-minded people who want to be in the room. So I will convene 20 founders of private equity firms, for instance, who don't know each other. And what I will find is everyone will leave knowing who the other people were. And what always happens is that they follow up with each other. They make friends, they do deals together. Magic happens because of that. And I love doing it. It's a lot of work and it's hard to do, and there's a whole recipe, but convening has really been my way of building my network.
What are some of the elements of that recipe that you've found work really well?
First of all, anyone who's time constrained, which is pretty much me and anyone I serve in my business, wants to really come to an event because of the other people there. I'm not a big fan of we're having the speaker, just because I feel in my events, every person in the room is a star. And people want to hear from each other and get to know each other. So I like small, intimate rooms, under 22 people, where the food is amazing. We're holding it probably in a hard to access space so that there's sort of like a triple bottom line to why you're coming. I'm getting to go there. I'm getting to go there with these people. And then I'm getting to go there with these people who might change the course of my business. So I think that's my general recipe. I had 20 female CEOs in a room this week where we made sure they would get to know each other. And then we went off to a fun concert. But if you asked the 20 women in the room what was the most valuable thing, it was the dinner, because it was getting to know each other. And I think female leadership is a specific thing. So when you meet 20 women who are all running organizations at the top, who are just like you, who I could reach out to, not just for business, but to vent, to be friends. I mean, it was a very magical event.
So you mentioned bringing people together in a special place. I'd love to hear more about how you think about what special places are.
Well, first of all, environment counts when you're convening people, the atmosphere, whether it's loud, whether the food's good. So I think about every single detail. But in terms of special places, I met a woman years ago named Becca. She runs a firm called Becca. And she is magic in the hospitality space. She worked on launching the polo bar Ralph Lauren still does. She's working with Tishman Speyer on bringing people back to Rock Center. She has this crazy hospitality magic. And I got obsessed with her and her business. And actually, I invested in it because of the importance of hospitality. And where I see this going is that my clients who never really thought about hospitality as a strategy will. But Becca has been working in New York City, opening the hottest clubs, restaurants, et cetera, for 20 years. And she knows everything that's coming, everything that's opening. So what's really cool is to be able to do an event with the best crowd in a space that no one's been to, or a space that's just about to open. If you're convening founders or CEOs, they generally have been everywhere or can go everywhere. So it's really cool to have something in a place they have not been to yet. So if I can get that as part of the recipe, I'm all about it.
So in addition to access to the right places, what have you learned from Becca about hospitality?
Well, I've learned that every single thing matters in the environment, and that being welcoming, I mean, hospitality is being welcoming, having that welcoming feeling and procuring an environment that just puts a rocket booster on whatever the goal is really impactful. So I'll bring up a friend of yours and a friend of mine, Greg Fleming, who runs Rockefeller Capital. If you go to visit Greg Fleming, you will walk into Rockefeller Center and someone will greet you before you even get to the security desk and say, "Ted Seides, are you coming to meet Greg Fleming?" "Yes." "Oh." They will whisk you through security. They will take your coat. They will take your order. You will sit down with whatever your favorite latte is. It is such a great experience. That's a wealth management firm. It makes sense. But ask me, does anyone else in wealth management do that? The answer is no. And I asked about it. The first time I ever went there, I'm like, this is amazing. Who does it? And it was really well thought out. So there's a client who understood the power of hospitality. That impression could be the reason someone chooses Rockefeller Capital. It's so well done.
When you take it from a small group that you've put together to bigger conference venue, and you mentioned more and more people are understanding the desire to go tell your story. It's gotten crowded even to have those speaking events. How have you helped your clients navigate the important but messy gatherings that come at big conferences?
We have spent the last 5 or 6 years mapping every significant LPGP event around the world. And we decided we want to understand every one of them down to the nub. because these are commercially important events for clients. They're generally going to raise money at these events. They're going to make connections, and they're going to be able to build their brand. So a lot of value can come out of these. And what's happened in the world of the LPs is I think a lot of LPs have decided, I'd rather work from home and then go to the conference and bang out a lot of meetings and then go back work from home. So I think there have been a number of drivers to why these LPGP conferences have become so important. But the way we look at it, and we have launched a whole business against this circuit of conferences, is if you are a time-pressed executive, which anyone who goes to these things are, you need to make sure you have ROI on your time and your spend. And what does that look like? It's like, did I get the business development meetings? I should have. Did I get on stage and build my brand? And did I probably meet media on the ground that I can build relationships with for more brand building in the future? And then there's maybe some other agendas. But what we learned was most CEOs are knocking around these conferences without a plan. No one's really thought about how do we get the value. So we launched a business called Conference Concierge, where we actually work with CEOs, CIOs, whoever's going, to make sure that everything is concierged. And I don't mean just the logistics, like where am I staying and do I have a driver? Yeah, we can do that. But it's more, let's work with your IR team to make sure you have a really robust list of investor meetings. Let's work on what stage to get on, which panels to speak on, how we're going to procure that, capturing that, promoting it, amplifying it, and then this media piece. So that when you leave and you're like scratching your head in 2 weeks and say, was that worth it? We give you a report that says that was worth it. Because I experienced this myself. I don't want to get on a plane and spend all that time and exhaust myself and spend money if I don't know I'm getting a return. And typically speaking, there was no one inside these organizations responsible for the ROI on these things.
How do you go from having the idea that you want one of your clients to have a great experience at someone else's event to figuring out how do you execute on that?
We've been part of the fabric of most of these events for years and years and years. And a lot of what I do for my own business, I know works. So I do it for my clients. We do everything for our clients that we do for ourselves. I am obsessed with monetizing the mingle, I call it. We do not go and mingle and spend money on that unless we monetize it. And I've always known the day after what was my immediate ROI and what is my ROI 6 months later, a year later. It's just part of the way we tick commercially. But our clients weren't ticking that way. So we realized there was an opportunity to treat our clients like we treat ourselves and monetize the mingle. The reality is, even the most successful managers in the world, they're spending their own money, basically. So they're very careful with it, or they should be.
When you put those two things together, so you're working with the manager to get them to nail their narrative, and now you've set the stage so that they can monetize their mingle at a conference, how do you advise a manager to be consistent in telling their story, but also so that they continue to move the ball down the court in their process to ultimately trying to raise capital?
I think there should be certain subjects, topics, themes that you're talking about forever. I will be talking about Army of Entrepreneurs for the rest of my business life because that's our culture. It's not going to change. It may evolve here and there, but in the right venues, Army of Entrepreneurs is still really interesting every time. And then there are other things that do change. You have to be able to have insight about what the market's doing or where the world is going. Those are the things that change. So I think the clients who are really good at this, we have figured out these are the topics that are tried and true and you bring up every single time. They work for you, and you should just bring the rabbit out of the hat every time. And then there are the things like market insights or white papers on the future that of course have to change. You have to be topical and you have to be relevant. So it's kind of mixing those things.
I'd love to hear of those things that are changing. Why are the reasons that people are hiring Prosek Partners today?
On that rubric of talent, deals, and capital, raising money is a huge driver. It won't surprise you. It's a very treacherous money-raising environment. People want every advantage that they can get. Now, if you asked an LP, do you care about the GP's brand? They'll say no. But when you unpack it, do you care that they have a great culture? Do you care that they have distinct advantages? Do you care that so-and-so wrote this amazing op-ed piece that you took seriously and sent around to your investment committee? They'll say yes, yes, yes. So it depends the way you define it. But the reality is, I call it, are you having the first meeting or the second meeting on the fundraising? Meaning, if you rock up to a new LP and they don't know you, you spend a lot of time educating. If you rock up to a new LP and they're like, oh, I know all about your firm, let's get down to business, you're having the second meeting, not the first. And I think that efficiency is what a lot of our clients are attracted to. We're creating brand preference. Why do I pick this credit manager over these 30 other ones? That's kind of what we're trying to do. And then there's just the sheer advice and navigation. We've spent a lot of time in the Middle East because 3 years ago, everyone was on a plane to the Middle East. Navigating, how do I go about brand building and money raising in the Middle East? So navigating is a big part of it because the world has changed. That's one of the macro themes in our portfolio. The Middle East would be one. The democratization of alternatives is another. Credit and where that's going, whether there will be credit issues. I think that's going to be in the next 12 to 24 months, a huge theme. So there are these interesting themes that bubble up every year that are a little bit different. Those are some of them.
Really curious about the chicken and an egg from your perspective. You talk about the Middle East, you say, well, everyone's going to the Middle East, so we're going to go to the Middle East. How do you get a sense of where capital is likely to flow?
Oh, that's a great question. The cool thing about having the portfolio of clients that we do is at any one time, there's something interesting going on with one of them that's signaling us about the way the market's going to move. I always say I am blessed to work with the smartest investors in the world, full stop. So I am traveling the hallways of hundreds of these firms, and I'm just picking up the signals. It's an amazing job to have. We're seeing trends as they're developing. So at any one of these macro themes, we saw like, ooh, that's coming. It's sort of like if you're not obsessing right now about how AI is going to destroy your business, you're crazy. You've seen enough of it at this early stage to make some guesses about where this is going and hopefully get in front of some of it.
So if you look at those two big pools, say the sovereigns, the Middle East, and then democratization of alts, very different in terms of how you would approach the Middle East or a private wealth manager in the US. So let's start with the Middle East. What have you learned about what's successful for people trying to raise capital in the Middle East?
First of all, a lot of our managers are making 5 or 6 trips to the Middle East on a regular basis during the season. It comes down to building relationships. And the Middle East is very relationship oriented. So it's not very different than any other LP in the sense that you need to go and prove that you are a trusted relationship before you're going to get a check. And I think too many people think it's going to be easy, and it's not. And one thing that has definitely changed a lot is the math is all that counted in the past. Meaning if you were performing, you didn't even have to really talk to your LPs. They were writing checks. Now I interview LPs on panels and I ask them, for the GPs in the audience, what does it take? And every time they said, years of relationship building before they write a check. Years. And I do think that in a world that is getting less and less trusted, especially with the technology we're facing, truth and trust is the North Star. How do you build trust to the extent that someone's going to trust you with their capital? So I think the reason it's become hard and you have to take so many trips to the Middle East is you've got to prove this is going to be a relationship. So that relationship orientation is everything. It's not very different from anywhere else. I just think there's a perception of easy money that's not actually true. And then the Middle East isn't one place, obviously. You have to say, do I align more with Abu Dhabi or Saudi or Qatar? And then you start to unpack, how do you approach it? Every one of these places now has a very serious investment conference where they want the best managers in the world showing up to their investment conferences, which is why we spend so much time there. The investment conferences in the Middle East do draw LPs from the region and GPs into one space to do business, and it can be efficient and effective.
What have you learned about different cultural norms in the process of traveling over, meeting with people, and building those relationships?
I have learned that we're all human beings. In my first couple of trips to the Middle East years ago, there are certain things, especially as a female, that you felt just sort of uncomfortable, whether it was the dress code or anything else. But I remember having a meeting at actually a big sovereign wealth fund. And we met with the two men in charge. And of course, everyone was dressed in their traditional dress. And I was intimidated, I won't lie. And then I found out that these two guys, they both went to American universities. And there was some sort of program in the Middle East where American universities would take kids from the Middle East, but they didn't know where they were going till they got on the plane, pretty much. One of them ended up in the University of Indiana, and the other one ended up in New Hampshire. And they were talking about how surprised they were that their roommates were doing XYZ. It was very funny. And it just broke down the humanity in the first 5 minutes of the meeting. And I realized humanity is relatively the same. Having said that, listen, you have to respect cultural norms. I don't go to Saudi and wear a dress with no sleeves. That's disrespectful. So I think there's basics that end up happening in different regions. But I would say for the most part, humanity is humanity and relationship building is relationship building.
When you go from the large pools of sovereign wealth funds to thinking about a more dispersed private wealth market, what have you seen of the firms that have been successful in raising private capital in this movement of democratization of alts?
So the democratization of alts is such a huge deal. And I would say almost none of my clients understand the amount of money and time it will take to do true consumer marketing. It's consumer marketing. You're trying to get to the FA, and then you're trying to influence the consumer, basically. It may be a high net worth consumer, but it's a consumer. So I think institutional marketing, and I don't mean fundraising, I mean our kind of marketing, is relatively contained to a small target of people. The democratization of alts is consumer marketing. So I think that there is a massive education process that needs to take place about what it takes to build a consumer brand. And also just the armies of people it takes to sort of hit the retail channel from a sales perspective. So I think we're early in figuring out who's going to win in the wealth channel, but I do think it requires a whole different game.
What are the components of that game for those who have been successful?
It's wider marketing, it's paid advertising, it's paid LinkedIn targeting. It's all these things. You look at what a retail asset manager like a Schroders or Franklin Templeton does to market to people buying funds, that's what it takes. And if you look at those retail asset managers, they're way ahead of the game, not just in distribution, but in their mindset on what it takes to market. I mean, I can only guess what T. Rowe Price spends in TV advertising. I see it all the time. So you're talking about a whole different world. And that actually fascinates me because we actually represent a lot of large retail asset managers. There's sort of this arms race going on between, will the retail guys win? Because they're, of course, buying up alternative asset managers because they've got the pipe, they've got the distribution, they've got the marketing. Or will it be the alternative asset managers who are bringing on people and trying to market it? Like, it's an interesting arms race going on right now.
So when you go from the capital side to the investment side, you mentioned credit as being something that's obviously exploded, AI. I'm really curious, how do you get up to speed as an organization to help serve those types of trends?
Typically speaking, we will have had a few clients in a space that give us all the indication we need to make a big move. I don't know how many years ago, 5, 6 years ago. The majority of our large private equity firms were like, hey, we should launch a private credit division. So it just started to pop up in that way. We had a couple of legacy private credit firms who have been around for 20 years. It just started to come up in almost every conversation we were having with anyone. Should we launch private credit? We're very lucky that we have a portfolio that is so big and wide that we see these things bubbling up early. And I forget what book it was, but there was some sort of philosophy like shoot bullets and then throw a cannonball at it. You see enough bullets that you know one's going to be a cannonball and you go for it. So we've been lucky enough to work with Eldridge for a long time. So we've understood sports investing for a long time. And then we're lucky enough to work with Arctos, who's really the pioneer in GP stakes in sports investing. So once we had those guys under the hood a couple of years ago, it was obvious to us we should have a sports means finance practice, which we hired a guy named John Schwartz, who was at the NFL. He was head of comms, but he had a banking background. Perfect hire for us. We're not going to be a sports firm. We're going to be a sports meets finance firm. And that was an early move in a space, but we already saw where the signals were going.
How do you go about something like approaching AI? So new technology, not going to be the experts, but it's clearly of interest to what your clients are doing, and therefore they have to figure out how to communicate it.
So I've been on the board of a AI firm called Signal AI for 6 years. And I've told all my senior people, we need to be experimenting with tools every single day. So we're pretty obsessed with making sure that the senior people on our firm are experimenting with new technologies. And we actually, as much as we run a marketing and communications firm, we also VC into emerging technology companies, usually in our space. And that's been really helpful to help us stay ahead of the game. We also have some really incredible clients in the AI space, which helps us stay informed. Listen, I'm running a firm, so I'm freaked out about the future. And anyone who isn't is crazy. We've basically been in the hourly billing business our whole lives. And I think hourly billing is a threat if you read anything about AI. Law firms, consulting firms, hourly billing businesses that have armies of people doing things that the machines can do, that's over. So you have to be obsessing about your own business model. And I think what's very cool about the private markets business is it's all run by founder entrepreneurs. I'm a founder entrepreneur. So we actually share together. What are you worried about? How can we help each other? I've learned this, but no one really knows where this thing is going. But I have to say, if I had any advice for anyone, just make sure you're experimenting, reading, and maybe sitting on the boards of some emerging technology companies today.
So Jen, I've often described you as an entrepreneur competing in the PR space. And part of that has been these series of either new initiatives or people to lead them that you bring in over time. You mentioned Deirdre. Maybe that's a good place to start. How do you go from you're a communications firm to there's a well-known TV journalist who then joins you?
So I'm obsessed with talent because I feel like I run a talent business. So I'm always in the market meeting people. I stop my day when someone says, gosh, this person's extraordinary. So Deirdre's an interesting story because she came to me through someone I know, and I just thought we'd have a coffee. She's obviously someone you'd want to get to know. She's been sort of a famous TV anchor for most of her life. I had coffee with her. It was love at first sight. I mean, for both of us. So we just figured out, like, we need to do this, but we have no idea what it's going to look like. And then I sort of looked around for the low-hanging fruit. Obviously, Deirdre can train anyone to get on stage and is amazing at it. That's low-hanging fruit. But what could we do next that is unique? So part of it is hiring people who are also entrepreneurial. The reason Deirdre's been so successful here is because she is entrepreneurial. She isn't someone who joins and says, okay, tell me what to do. Of course, I had things to do, but she also created some of her own things to do, which there's nothing that gives me more psychic income than co-creating a whole new venture, division, whatever, with someone who's actually entrepreneurial. And John Schwartz turned out to be the same way. I met John. I had sports on the brain, but if you asked me rank order the hires you need to make at this moment, it wasn't that. He was so perfect and so entrepreneurial and so tired of corporate jobs that I'm like, we could build something together. So I love builders. Not all my ideas work, but I'm a fast failure gal. Like, I experiment. If it doesn't work, I just move on to the next one. But I do believe you have to be blowing up the playbook on a regular basis and experimenting to get the really great stuff. I mean, Katie O'Reilly joined me from Milken. She's building this conference concierge practice with me. It's amazing. It all does start with the one great person. I could have all the ideas in the world. I've got to bring in the person who's going to entrepreneur alongside me and make it come to life. Part of it is reading the tea leaves and seeing what's ahead. Part of it is just stopping your day when you know you've just met someone really special. And what's great about being a private company is I can just make those moves when it makes sense. I do not hire people often when I need them. I hire them because someone's very special comes across my desk and I'm like, this was not in the budget, but I'm doing it because it's all about the people.
What are some of those new experiments that you're thinking about today?
Well, interestingly, if you asked me, have I been focused at all on being a female in business, I would say zero. I never even thought about it. I've never had any issues that are large about being a female entrepreneur. It's been all good. So I empathize with a lot of gals who have not had it that way, but I've had it really good. And in fact, I've loved being uniquely in a business sometimes that there aren't a lot of women. Having said that, if you asked me 5 years ago, how many female CEOs do you have in the portfolio? I'd be like, 5, 6. I have 40 now, 40. Women are getting elected into the top seat in a big way in this business. And I have gone out of my way to help the special ones build their profiles because I know it's going to get them ahead, whether it's getting the board seat they want, getting the top job. So I have a whole program called Take the Stage, which I do with females and diverse executives. But where am I getting to where the business opportunity is? This is the working title. It's a little silly. I can't use it, but there's a girl boss advisory firm right in front of me. And the reason is, if you look at the unbelievable women I work with, Jean Hines at Wellington, Jenny Johnson at Franklin Templeton, Robin Grew at Man Group, and the list goes on. I was one of the first people to take them on stage. These women don't want to go on stage often. They've been in their operating roles or investing. They didn't have to be front facing, but I just knew I get you on stage and the world falls in love with you. You can move hearts and minds, and those women do. And I think it's contributed so much to them discovering their leadership power. I mean, Robin Grew is a great example. She was the GC and COO of Man Group. Such a special talent. I knew it. I knew it years ago. And I'm like, I want to work with you. I want to work with you and show you your power on a stage. And if you've seen Robin Grew, who is now the first global CEO of Man Group was founded in the 1700s. She is magic. Anyone who meets her, hears her, is inspired. And that inspirational leadership, you can't put a price tag on it. That's what every employee wants. They want an inspirational leader. So I think some of these women are really changing the course of time and changing the complexions of their firms. And I'm just really excited about it. So I think there's actually a psychic income in there for me and probably some business income too.
What else is on your mind?
I love LPs, I realized. Me and my colleagues, we are totally unthreatening to LPs. We don't raise money from them. So I've been trying to figure out how can we work more with LPs? And actually, I was invited to do a workshop at SBAI recently called Take the Stage, which was all about brand building for LPs. I was wondering, are they going to show up? Do they really care? They do. They care about their personal brands. They've been under fire. A lot of the university endowments have had to face really treacherous media and attacks. There's been just way more of my world and their world coming together. And I'm really interested in exploring building more of those relationships. And there are some very special LPs who are some of my gal pals. I love going on stage with them. They're amazing. I want to do more of that. So listen, it's great for my business to get really close to LPs, even if it's just for intel. But I'm really looking forward to exploring more of those relationships for our firm.
As you've spent some time writing in your LinkedIn newsletter, I'd love to ask you about some Isms, these catchphrases you create. I'll throw a couple out and have you talk about them. The concept of the minus mindset.
The minus mindset, actually, I did not create those words, but I saw them in The Economist. It was an article about how it's very tempting for leaders to add and add and add and add to the plate of your best people. But how about minusing? That concept of the minus mindset. What can I take off your plate that you shouldn't be doing? I call it best and highest use. Are we dragging you down with so many new projects that you're not doing your best and highest use? I just loved the concept of the minus mindset. What's really terrific about LinkedIn is the analytics. I know when I've written something and it captures the audience. So, when you get 50,000 views in 3 hours, you kind of know you're onto something. Minus mindset's a popular topic that's not talked about a lot in leadership.
How about nice or necessary?
Oh, that's one of my faves. So I'm often asking my folks, especially in volatile times or bad economic times, I always say to my peeps, look at what you're doing for clients and ask yourself, is it nice or is it necessary? Because if it's nice, it's going away. It's getting cut out of the budget. If it's necessary, we're going to survive. And I think it's a really important rubric for us to look at our work for clients and always be moving it into the necessary zone. But I always say this also to my moms, my gals who go out on maternity leave. I'm like, here's the good news when you come back. You will separate the nice from the necessary. You will not be spending any time on the nice. If you are gossiping at the water cooler for like half an hour, you're not doing it anywhere. You are doing only the necessary because you're not going to have time. And frankly, a lot of my gals come back better after having kids because they separate the nice from the necessary and they know how to laser focus into what they need to do, not what all the other noise. Saying no is so hard. People don't say no easily. That nice but necessary mindset makes you say no to the things that really don't count or are time wasters.
How about the 51% rule?
Oh, yes. The 51% rule means if you're in a leadership position and you have a 51% good day, you are killing it because your job is chief problem solver. I tend to be an optimist and I tend to be a glass half full person. So that was really about how when you grade your day, if it was only 51% good, it was actually a great day. And I love this concept about luck moments, that every great leader was born with the same amount of luck moments. But the people who hit it out of the park are the people who know they're in a good luck moment and say, okay, tune out the noise. This is my moment. And they max it out. And they also know how to turn a bad luck moment into a good luck moment. So I think having an over 51% great day is partially in your control because have you turned the bad luck moments into good luck moments? Can you grade the bad things as good things? I like to look at bad things that happen to me and ask myself, was I actually able to learn from that and turn it around?
As you look at the last couple of years, as you've rode this growth with your clients in a lot of the private markets, what have been some of the more difficult aspects, the other 49% of running the business?
We put a stake in the ground on private markets super early. And I will tell you something, that was hard because we were trying to sell something people just did not want to buy. And actually, my entire career, I was trying to sell something people did not want to buy because it was an idea before its time. So the whole idea for this business was that the only market in financial communications and marketing was on defense when I started my career. It was all about M&A transactions or crisis. Financial services companies didn't believe in the concept of brand at all. So the idea that one day they're going to wake up and care about this stuff was crazy. So I think I spent about 7 years knocking on doors with my idea that the world would change and people weren't buying. So I think any entrepreneurial venture, you have to really stick with your conviction long enough for the weather to change and the stars to align. Had I given up on those visions easily, this place wouldn't exist. So I would say that I think making your own luck is a really important thing, but I think nothing beats grit, hustle, and hard work in building anything.
When you're working on that 7 years ahead and you have an organization with you that you have to keep pushing in that way, how have you gone about motivating all the people on your team and keeping them energized when something takes that long to come to fruition?
I always ask myself, actually, if I got hit by a bus, what does Prosek lose? One thing is the chief motivation officer. One of the things that I obsess about is making sure people know what we stand for, where we're going, and how they fit into it. So you would never ask anyone at Prosek, where are you guys trying to go and what are you trying to be? Everyone knows. And that's why they're here. Don't join the firm if you don't want to be on that mission. So there's a mission that's very clear. I think the other thing that motivates people is that we've created a beautiful cultural bubble that is a beautiful community. So even if the world is really horrible, it's really nice in here. And people are motivated by that. I think they're also motivated by, we are a firm of celebrations and thank you. If you're doing great stuff, you're going to hear from me. That's great. I mean, I sent a note to the guy who cleans our terrace the other day because he was here on Juneteenth on the day off cleaning the terrace because he cared about it. And I'm like, Jose, that's freaking amazing that you cleaned the terrace on a day off. You didn't have to do that, but it shows how invested you are in the place. So when people notice that you've done something well, that is so motivating. I think too many people in business don't understand the power of thank you. And I think that that's motivating.
What are you most excited about for the next couple of years?
Oh my God, so many things. I'm excited about dominating the financial services space and continuing to. I have a joke that my strategy is called proopoly. I want a proopoly. I want it. And it excites me. It excites me that I get to work with the smartest people in the world. I mean, I do. They're tough and rigorous and sometimes not always kind. But the reality is I am motivated by their ideas. I mean, also, like, if you look at my career, I can't really take credit for the fact that I have a really great financial personal plan. I have long-term care insurance. I have everything. And I had it early because of my clients. I get to learn every day. And I always say, shame on me. If I run a crappy business or a business with bad margins, shoot me, because I get to learn from all these unbelievable people. So I will always be motivated by that. I'm a growth freak. I'm a progress freak. I have to move forward. I'm like a shark. I can't swim back. So I'm motivated that the next 5 years, I think, are going to be really exciting for our business. I think the emerging market of marketing has maybe 10 years left. So that's a growthy 10 years, and that's exciting. I have another half of my business, by the way, which is just big corporates, and I love them too. But since we're on capital allocators, we'll talk about the private markets.
All right, Jen, I want to make sure I get a chance to ask you a couple of closing questions. Some of these will be a little bit different. So you mentioned at the onset that when you convene people in a small setting, sometimes just one great relationship they made can change the trajectory of their career. Was there one great relationship that you made early on that changed the trajectory of yours?
Oh, yes. So when I was in my 20s, I ended up running this business totally over my skis. But we were like 4 people. Our clients were terrible. It was not Prosek Partners. I had no interest in staying with it. It was small and ugly. And I figured I'm going to go take a job at a big PR firm in New York. I was in my 20s, probably 25 years old. I ended up interviewing at this firm called Fleishman Hillard. I end up in the CEO's office, who was like 60. I'm like 25. I'm like, why am I in the CEO's office? They must have been like, who's the whippersnapper with her own thing? But he shuts the door. His name was Jan Van Meter. He shut the door and he said, look, I'm retiring soon. I have a daughter around your age. You've got the job if you want it. Everybody loves you. He's like, but why don't you put your head down, grow your business, and sell it to us one day? Why don't you do that? And I was like blown off my chair. I'm like, literally, I was like, you could do that? My parents were teachers. I didn't have a lot of exposure to business. I kind of left that meeting like, talk about luck moments. I knew I had just gotten the best advice of my life. And that was the day I decided, you know what? I'm going to put my head down and make the ugly small thing as good as it can be incrementally every year and give it a shot. And I never went back to thank Jan Van Meter. And 2 years ago, I read that he died. I was devastated because I'm like, I am a you-know-what. How could I have never gone back to this man? So I called our trade publication and I said, I have to write a story about the generosity of this advice. And I did. And so his family and everyone knew what a stand-up person that was. But I think about that, and I think about what I would be doing if it wasn't for that. So that's how I think about relationships. That one good piece of advice, that one relationship, it can change the course of time.
What are the most impactful 2 or 3 lessons that you've learned from your clients?
I have learned to be fiscally smart. I have learned to be a great investor. As you know, I have a GP stakes business. Where do you think that came from? So I am really good at knowing somebody's doing something really good and copying it in my own way. I would say I've also learned in the world of founder entrepreneurs, we're all obsessive creatures. We're happy to work 24/7. I've also got to observe how that can destroy your life. And I do think about the human part of that too. So I get to sort of watch the business and personal experiment of life. Also, I'm in the crisis communications business. So I deal with people at their lowest moments when they share their deepest, darkest secrets. And I take that super seriously. But of course, as a human being, I learn from that too.
What's one fact that most people don't know about you?
I have a motorcycle license. That's probably it. I'm first generation American. Yeah.
Which two people have had the biggest impact on your professional life?
Oddly enough, I never met my mother's mother, my grandmother. She died at 50 of cancer, but I have a picture of her on my desk, and she's on a motorcycle with her two little girls in the sidecar in Switzerland. And this is a woman who had an engineering degree, was a business person, raised two girls on her own, rode a motorcycle. I mean, I wish I met her. I feel like I have the coolest DNA. So I wouldn't say that she obviously made an impact in that tangible way. But knowing that you come from brave stock has actually been motivating to me. The other person, of course, was my first partner in business, Dan Jacobs, who has passed away. I went to work for him out of college because I couldn't get another job. It was a recession. I didn't mean to work for him. I didn't want to work for him. I didn't want to be in a suburb. I didn't want any part of it. But the reason I ended up with the business is he knew I was going to leave that business when the market turned. And he uncharacteristically, probably when I was 24 or 23, was like, I think you're a great talent. Let's shut down business and open our business. And we became 50-50 partners. And that's how it started. So for somebody to take a shot on someone that young is just weird. I mean, you look back at it like, that's so weird. I mean, granted, but the business was like a nothing, but still he believed in me. And I think that was really impactful.
All right, Jen, last one. What life lesson have you learned that you wish you knew a lot earlier in life?
The two most powerful words in business are just ask. I did know that from a young age. Why don't you just ask for what you want? X% of the time, you just might get it. So I can't say I learned that later in life because I knew it early in life, oddly, but it's been so incredibly important. I think what I would have done differently is I think I would have gone bigger with my talent moves earlier in my career. Talent is everything. I remember reading a book by the guy at Google who hired the first 5,000 people. And he said the difference between an average engineer and a rockstar engineer is billions of dollars. And that is true. So I wish I knew that earlier in my career.
Well, Jen, thanks so much for sharing your incredible insights on what's happening in the market.
Thank you for caring.
Thanks for listening to the show. To learn more, hop on our website at capitalallocators.com, where you can join our mailing list, access past shows, learn about our gatherings, and sign up for premium content, including podcast transcripts, my investment portfolio, and a lot more. Have a good one, and see you next time.